A gute Woche. The Rebbe soll gesund sein, began the Farbrengen this afternoon, that it is the Shabbos before Yud Shvat. And we know what the Zohar tells us, that Shabbos gives bracha into the entire week. So therefore, this Shabbos gives bracha to the entire week, as well as to this meaningful day of Yud Shvat. Furthermore, we are only 3 days away from Yud Shvat, because Yud Shvat is in the first half of the week. And we know, it is even based on halacha, that the first half of the week has a closer shaychus to Shabbos than the latter part of the week, though the entire week receives its bracha from Shabbos. Regarding the inyan of Yud Shvat, and the Shabbos before Yud Shvat, the Rebbe says we really spoke about all of this last year. Because last year, the Kvius, the way the calendar was set up, was exactly like this year, that the Shabbos before Yud Shvat was 8 days in the month of Shvat, and Yud Shvat came out on the following month. Furthermore, not only are we 3 days before Yud Shvat, but we are on Shabbos Parshas Boy. When the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away, originally in the year of Tafshin Yud, he passed away on Shabbos Parshas Boy. Though then it was Taki Yud Shvat. Today it is 8 days in Shvat, but at least on one part we are identical as in the year when he passed away, that when he passed away it was Shabbos Parshas Boy, and now it is today it is also Shabbos Parshas Boy. So regarding the inyanim which the Rebbe says we've spoken about last year, being that a year has passed, he's confident that everybody has fulfilled the inyanim which were discussed, especially based on the Hebrew expression of a year. In Hebrew, a year is called a shana. So it is explained in Svarim that what is the meaning of shana? Shana stems from the word shinui, changes, which means that a complete year, a cycle of a year, has all different changes. Within a year we have all different weathers, all different types of changes. So now that we say that we have passed the year since last year Yud Shvat, this means that we have gone through all the changes, all the various types of changes which happen throughout a year. And now we're approaching a new year, and here we come to the second interpretation in the meaning of Shana, which Shana also means to repeat. So now we are entering a repeat, we are entering a new year again of the inyan of Yud Shvat again. And especially based on what Torah teaches us, that everything that a Yid does is Mailin B'Kodesh. In Kedusha, when we deal with holiness, we constantly have to keep on going higher and higher. So we have gone through all the inyanim which were discussed a year ago. And we have gone through a complete year cycle, a period of a whole year. And now we are to go higher and yet higher, Maila, from pedestal to pedestal, higher in the servicing the Rebbeinu Shalom. Now the Rebbe continues, however, there's a major difference between this year and last year. And that is, that this year is a Shnas Hashmita. It's the 7th year. However, last year was not the 7th year. What do we mean by a 7th year? That is a year of a sabbatical year, that in Israel we are prohibited from doing any type of field work. Another factor is that this year, which we are in now, Tavshim Mem Zayin, this year began with a Shabbos. Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Rosh Hashanah this year was Shabbos. What does this show us? That this entire year has a very strong shaychus to the concept of Shabbos. It's a Shabbos, a weekday Shabbos, not a Shabbos from the week was the beginning of the year, and the entire year is a year of Shabbos. A year when we are prohibited to do any type of field work in Eretz Yisrael. Regarding Shabbos, the Torah tells us, Kol melachtecha asuya. A Yid that comes Shabbos has to look at it that all his work is already done. He has no work to do. Shabbos we're not allowed to work. Now when we're talking on a point of view from the entire year, we are living in a year when our avodah, our task as far as fulfilling the wish of the Rabbeinu Shalom is a one of a higher level one than all other years, similar to the Avodah of Shabbos. And as the Rebbe explained, Al Pi Torah, a Yid is not supposed to be going around and doing nothing. So when we say that comes a year of Shabbos, which is this year, what type of work does a Yid do? He does the work of the Rebishter. And the work of the Rebishter we are permitted to do. Melechas Hashem, this is something which we are allowed to do in the Shnas HaShmita. And we know Chazal tell us that a Yid, through his Avodah, is capable of becoming a shutef with the Rabbeinu Shalom. Shutef LaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Maaseh Bereishis can become a partner with the Almighty. Now that we're talking regarding the Avodah, in Inyanim of Yira Shamayim, God-fearing Inyanim of learning Torah, Chazal tell us, Hakol b'dei Shamayim, chutz mi Yira Shamayim. Everything is in the hand of heaven, in the hand of the Rabbeinu Shalom, except the fact that whether a person should be God-fearing or not. So when we are excelling in Inyanim of Yira Shamayim, God-fearing of the Rabbeinu Shalom, here we are doing Inyanim which we are kind of like doing giving Inyanim to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Not only are we a partner with the Rebishter, but it is a yet higher madrege. We are offering the Rabbeinu Shalom things which Kaviyach he did not have until now. And he is gaining all of this through the Avodah of a Yid, especially based on the famous expression of Lemaisi Yodecha Tichseif, that the Rabbeinu Shalom has a desire. His desire is to our deeds and our actions. This is what his desire is. So Memela, when we're talking about this outstanding Avodah, which is demanded from every one of us in this year, in the year of Shemitah, it is a much higher Avodah than in all other years. Now that we have compared this year to Shabbos, we also find in Svarim that La'asad Lavai, the time when Mashiach will come, that period is compared to Shabbos. But we know, it's Halach and Shulchan Aruch, that on Friday afternoon, we taste the Shabbos food. Based on a pasuk, Toyamecha Chayim Zoch. Memele, we now are getting a taste of the Shabbos food, meaning we are involved in such, the Rebishter gives us koiches, that in this year, this is such an outstanding year. This is a year of Shabbos, and this is a year of preparing ourselves to the coming of Mashiach, because we are already Erev Shabbos, so we are tasting the food of Shabbos. The Rebbe mentions, explain the Chassidus, there are two psukim, Eila Toildas HaShamayim V'Oretz, which talks about the creation of the world. Then the pasuk tells, there's another pasuk elsewhere, Eila Toildas Peretz. Peretz was a descendant of Yehuda, and Mashiach will be a descendant of Peretz. So Medrash explains that the word Toildos, when it is mentioned regarding to Peretz, it is spelled Mole, meaning, in Hebrew the word Toildos could be spelled with one vav, could be spelled with two vavs. Tov Lamed Daled Vav Saf could be spelled Tov Vav Lamed Daled Vav Saf. That is called Mole. We spell it fully as we pronounce it. So Chazal stress, when we're talking about Eila Toildos Peretz, which this is an indication for the birth of Mashiach, here the pasuk uses the expression Toildos Mole. It's spelled fully, because this is again indicating on the high madreges which will be coming when Mashiach will be here. The Rebbe concluded the Sikha with the famous expression which is quoted on behalf of the Friedeker Rebbe: Tracht gut wird sein gut. Think good, and it'll be that way. In other words, we shouldn't have any negative thoughts. All our thoughts should be in a positive way. And then it will be fulfilled that way, that we will be able to do this Avodah, which is demanded from us in this outstanding year, in the year of Shnas HaShemitah. However, there is a very obvious difference, another obvious difference between this year and last year. Last year was a Shana Me'uberes, a leap year. This year is a Shana Pshuta, a regular calendar year. A leap year has 13 months in the Jewish calendar. So we must say that when it comes to a leap year, there's always more days in a leap year than in a regular year. What is the whole inyan of a leap year? A leap year is to straighten out the Shnas HaChama and the Shnas HaLavana. It's to straighten out the calendar of the sun and the calendar of the moon. The Rambam explains, being that they go apart one from another, certain amount of days every year. I think it's 11 days or something like it per year, approximately. So that is why every few years we set into the Jewish calendar an extra month, which gives us extra 30 days. So we straighten out the Shnas HaChama and the Shnas HaLavan, which this is regarding the inyan of a leap year. So leap year is an outstanding thing. It's the fact that we are given an extra month to do the Aveidah. However, there's an inyan of a simple year, a regular calendar year. What's the pshat, a regular calendar year? A shana pshuta means a simple year. What's pshat simple? Shana pshuta. Shana pshuta, if we translate it a simple year. What does that mean? It means that a yid uplifts himself to a yet higher madrega. In other words, he's not even getting involved in straightening out between the sun and the moon. He's uplifted to a yet higher level. He's above all that. He's in a total dedication to the Rabbeinu Shalom. This year, Yud Shvat, we have both pluses. Why? Because in reality, we are really within the year from last year's leap year. Last year's Yud Shvat was in a leap year. So now when we're approaching this Yud Shvat, we are still within a year of Shana Mu'beres, within the year of Shana Mu'beres. If we're looking at it from one Yud Shvat to another Yud Shvat, so now as we are entering Yud Shvat, we're within the year of last Yud Shvat. So we are, in other words, still have a very obvious shayches to the Shana Mu'beres. On the other hand, if we have to look at it from another angle, now that we are in Shvat now, this year is a regular year. So the Rebbe is bringing out that really in this year Yud Shvat we have both advantages. We have the advantage of a Shana Mu'beres, the plus of a Shana Mu'beres, as well as the plus of a Shana Pshuta. The Rebbe concluded the Sicha with the famous expression of the Frierdiker Rebbe, where the Frierdiker Rebbe stresses, Imdu hochen kulchem, that we should all stand united, ready to receive the brachas of the Rebishter. It's an expression which the Rebbe is quoting recently very, very often. And within this expression we have an indication on the importance of achdus, on the importance of unity. But in other words, the expression stresses, Imdu hochen kulchem, all of us together. When we are standing together, then we are special worthy of the bracha of the Rebishter. Here the Rebbe mentioned what we say in Shmona Esrei. Shmona Esrei we say, Barucheinu Avinu Kulanu Ke'echad. We ask the Rabbeinu Shalom, he should give us a bracha. And we right away add on, Kulanu Ke'echad, because we are all in a total unity. And when we are all standing in a tone of Achdus, this is when we are worth a special bracha from the Rabbeinu Shalom. The Rebbe kept on stressing in the Farbrengen very much the importance of Avas Yisrael, love from one yid to another. Not only love, but to such an extent that one yid becomes united with another, which is the Rebbe keeps on expressing himself regarding this matter, uses the expression Achdus Yisrael, total unity amongst Yidden. Now the Rebbe continued that there is a famous mimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe. That is the mimer of Basi Legani. In fact, the last mimer which the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out before he passed away, before he was nifta, was a mimer which begins with the pasuk Basi Legani Achoisi Kal. In the year Tafshin Yud, the Frierdiker Rebbe issued this mimer to be learned on the Shabbos of his Yortzeit, on the Shabbos which he actually passed away on that Shabbos. And this mimer came out right before Shabbos. Actually, Yud Shvat, besides being the Yortzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe, it is also the Yortzeit of his grandmother. The Frierdiker Rebbe's grandmother, Rebbetzin Rivke, the Rebbetzin of the Rebbe Maharash. And then he gave out this mimer, which was to be learned on the day of Yud Shvat, which was at that time also only the Yortzeit of Rebbetzin Rivke. And it was also later the day on that Shabbos, on Shabbos Pashas Bo, in the year Tafshin Yud, in 1950, that is when the Frierdiker Rebbe was nifta. In that mimer of Basi Legani, in fact, every year on the Yud Shvat Farbrengen, the Rebbe always says a mimer which also begins with this beginning of Basi Legani. The Basi Legani, the initial Basi Legani from the Frierdiker Rebbe, has 20 chapters, 20 prokim. And every year, in the Yud Farbrengen, the Rebbe explains another one of the 20 prakim of the Maimer of the Basi Lagani. In other words, it goes in a sequence. The first 20 years, like Yichus Yomim, the Rebbe explained the first 20 prakim of the Maimer, and then again began explaining it from the beginning, and every year stressing a different one of the prakim. Anyways, in this Maimer of Basi Lagani, the Frierdiker Rebbe there refers to the fact that Yidden have the title of Tzivos Hashem. Each and every Yid has this title and is worthy of the title that he's a soldier in the Rebishter's army. When do we find that Yidden were given this title? When the Yidden left Mitzrayim. When Yidden left Mitzrayim, then the Pasuk uses the expression that they were given this title of Tzivos Hashem. This is discussed, as we just mentioned, in the Maimer of Basi Legani, Achoisi Kala. It's a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Basi Legani, I have came to my garden. What is the inyan of a garden? We know there's a field and there's a garden. A garden is more a pleasurable person who wants to go for a walk, he would usually go for a walk in a garden. The Rebbe quoted, there's an expression in Gemara, L'tayel bepardes. A person is metayel, which means goes for a walk, and a pardes in a garden. So here again, Basi Legani, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says he came to his garden. Achoisi Kala, my sister the Kala. Who is the sister of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Who does he refer to as a sister? He refers to Yidden. Yidden, Knesset Yisrael, have amongst the many titles which we have from the Rebishter, there is also a title where the Rebishter refers to us as his sister. And again the Rebbe stresses, what is the expression sister, singular? How can we refer to all of Klal Yisrael and refer to them Achoisi, my sister, singular? This is again to stress the unity, the Achdus, which is demanded amongst Klal Yisrael. That all of Klal Yisrael are united to such an extent that the Rebishter refers to them as Achoisi. What do we see when a soldier goes out into the army? When a soldier goes out into the army, we see several interesting factors. Number one of the major concepts in an army is that the soldier has to listen and follow instructions, which in Hasidic terminology, it is Kabbalah Soil. Without questioning, without our own understanding, in order that an army should succeed, soldiers have to follow the instructions. The same when we're talking in spiritual sense. When we're talking about Yidden being soldiers in the Rebishter's army, the major factor is Kabbalah Soil. We have to accept and follow to the request of the Rabbeinu Shalom. Then we go a step further. We see amongst soldiers an unusual dedication one to another, to the extent that not only is a soldier willing to sacrifice his life when it's a question of defending his nationality, his country, but more than that, a soldier in an army sacrifices his life to save the life of his fellow soldier. What does this show us in the spiritual sense? That a Yid is willing to go Mesiras Nefesh, willing to sacrifice his life in order to rescue the life of another Yid. This shows how far we are to go. In other words, what is demanded from us as soldiers in the Rebishter's army, how much Avos Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael we are supposed to have. And the Rebbe continues, Yidden are called Tzivos Hashem. What does it mean, Yidden are Tzivos Hashem, soldiers in the Rebishter's army? This again stresses that a Yid is not a Metzias, is not something in his own eyes. His whole existence, his whole being is the fact that he's dedicated to the Rebishter. Tzivos Hashem. Rabbi said, we know that one of the titles which the Rebishter has is the Shem Tzivos, Tzivokos, which means that the Rebishter rules over us. When we're talking about this contact between the Rebishter and us, explained mitzad the inyan that the Rebishter rules over us, here it is not stressed as much the fact of our dedication to the Rebbe. The Rebbe brought an example. When a child or a person or an adult is thirsty and drinks and makes a bracha, what do we express in the bracha? Shahakol niya b'dvarai. How everything was created through the Rebbeinu Shalom. So naturally, we are realizing that the Rebbe is the one, the master of the world. He created the world. And Hakol, everything, niya, exists only b'dvarai, only through his sayings. Otherwise, nothing would exist. This corresponds to the interpretation of titling the Rebbe Tzavos, which is the same idea. The Rebbe rules over everything. Everything that is in existence in this world is ruled by the Rebbe. However, there is a higher level of dedication, which is Moidani. What do we say by Moidani? We rise in the morning and we say Moidani lefanecha. Chassidus explains at length what is the inyan of Moide. Moide is based on Hoidah. In other words, we put ourselves totally on the side. We admit. Moide is a total admittance. We admit. We give ourselves totally away to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Whatever the Rebbe wants to do with us, he can do it. A simple emunah. Alter Rebbe explains in Torah that there's an inyan of emunah pshuta, pure emunah in the Rebbe. Same idea when we're talking moidani, a pure dedication, a pure, complete giveaway to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And this is the inyan of the title which Yidden were worthy of Tzivos Hashem. I'll be stressed. And this was the level which the Yidden were at when they went out of Mitzrayim. Rabbi says furthermore that we can even look at this, that this is even a yet higher madrege which they achieved by Matan Torah. By Matan Torah we know that that was the barrier between Elyonim and Tachtonim, between heaven and earth, was broken by Matan Torah. This is what Chassidus explained in Chassidus at length, the accomplishment of Matan Torah, that Matan Torah accomplished that the wall, the mechitza, between Shamayim and Aretz, between earth and heaven, was taken away. As explained in Chassidus at length, which means that Matan Torah instilled the concept that anything which is any gashmiistic thing, which a mitzvah is done with, becomes penetrated with kedusha. And this is something which prior to Matan Torah did not exist. So the Rebbe says, when we're talking about this level, so in other words, we are considering Elyonim, we are considering Tachtonim. In other words, there's a higher madrege, there's a lower madrege, and what we're saying is that Matan Torah combined both of these madreges. Here, when we're looking at Yidden with the title of Tzivos Hashem, it is a yet higher madrege. It's a much higher madrege. In other words, the Yidden are above all types of limitations, above all types of boundaries, which reflect Maila, Mata, Shamayim, Ba'aretz, earth and heaven, or up and down. A Yid is at the level of Moidani lefanech. He's totally dedicated to Rebbeinu Shalom. Which this again is the inyan of, as we explained earlier, the idea of Achdus, total unity of amongst Yidden, and this is the proper preparation which is demanded from us to prepare ourselves for the coming of Mashiach, for the Gula Asida, this madrega of Tzivos Hashem. As it's customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe refers to a Rashi in the week Sedre, as well as also explaining the Rambam, the daily shiur of the Rambam. In today's Sedre and Parshas Boy, Rebbe raised two questions and two separate Rashis. We read in today's Sedre that when the Rebishter told Moshe Rabbeinu the parsha of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim and was relating to him all the details of the Korban Pesach, which is Pasuk Aleph in Kapitel Yud Beis. The Pasuk says, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron. Hashem is talking to Moshe and to Aaron, be'eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Mitzrayim, leimer as follows. And Rashi quotes the words be'eretz Mitzrayim, and Rashi tells us, Chutz l'krach. The Rebishter spoke to Moshe, he did not speak to him in the city of Mitzrayim. This was outside of the city. And then Rashi goes ahead, perhaps he spoke to him in the city. Talmud Loima, so the pasuk tells us, there's a pasuk in last week's Sedra, where the Makkah of Borod concluded. And there the pasuk uses the expression Kitseisi es ha'ir. Moshe said that he will go out of the city and talk to the Eibishter. So Rashi says, Ma tefillah kala lo yispalel b'toich hakrach lefi shehoisa malei gelul. In Madach, a simple tefillah. Moshe Rabbeinu was not mispalel, did not pray in the city, but walked out of the outskirts of the city. Why? Because the city was full of Avodah Zarah, the city was full of Getchkes, shehoisa malei gelulim. Dibur hamol kazeh lo yikolshke. Such a serious message which the Rebishter related here to Moshe Rabbeinu, it was naturally itself understood that Moshe was required to walk out of the city of Mitzrayim and go out into the outside of the city, and that is where the Rebishter spoke to him. So the Rebbe raised several questions in this Rashi and is explaining what is leading Rashi and what is forcing Rashi to learn that the Rabbeinu Shalom did not speak to Moshe in the city of Mitzrayim, but Moshe was forced to go out. First of all, why is there a need for the pasuk to say that the Rebishter spoke to Moshe and to Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Mitzrayim? We know they were in Mitzrayim. Why is the pasuk stressing be'eretz Mitzrayim? Self-understood. We all know that Moshe and Aaron at that time were in Mitzrayim. They were not elsewhere. This in itself is an indication to Rashi that it was discussed on the territory of Mitzrayim. In other words, it was part of the land of Mitzrayim, Eretz Mitzrayim. However, it was not a city, Mitzrayim. What do I mean? There is a populated area where people live. That would be a Moshav, a residential area in Mitzrayim. That is not where the Rabbeinu Shalom related this message to Moshe. Why? Because in every residential area of Mitzrayim, it was full of Avodah Zarah. So it wasn't suitable for the Rebishter to talk to Moshe. However, once Moshe walked out of the krach means, which is the word Rashi uses, krach in Hebrew means a city which is heavily populated, where people live, a residential area, that is called a krach. So in the krach, that is not where the Rabbeinu Shalom spoke to Moshe. Where did Hashem speak to Moshe? Told him to go out of the krach, where there are no Avodah Zarahs, and that is where Moshe was able to get the message of Achodesh Hazeh Lachem from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Rashi does not satisfy himself with this pirush and continues with a kal v'chomer and tells us. Last week Sedra we read that when Moshe wanted to stop upon the request of Paroi, the Makkah of Borod, what happened? Moshe told Paroi, I will leave the city and I will pray, and then this Makkah will stop. Why did he have to leave the city? Because in the city he didn't pray. He didn't want to be mispalel. Why didn't he want to be mispalel? Because the city had Avodah Zarahs. And where there's Avodah Zarah, it's not suitable to be mispalel to Hashem. So if for such a brief tefillah, Moshe saw it suitable to leave Mitzrayim. What do we mean by leaving Mitzrayim? Leaving the area where there are Avodah Zarahs, which is the residential area, and naturally Paro's palace as well. So when Moshe is coming to hear such a detailed message from the Rebishter, he definitely would leave the city, would leave the area where Avodah Zarahs can be found. The Rebbe is asking, if we look through this Sedra, last week's Sedra, we will notice that the Rabbeinu Shalom did talk to Moshe and spoke to him in the midst of Mitzrayim. Where did Moshe get the message about Makas Preires? The message about Makas Preires he got right in front of Paro. So we see that Hashem spoke to Moshe in Mitzrayim, in Paro's area, in the area of the palace, where there were definitely Avodah Zarahs. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, let us go out of these inyanim here. Let us turn back to Chumash Bereishis. In Chumash Bereishis, we also read about a story that happened with Paroi and a story that happened with Avimelech when Avram arrived with Sarah, and Hashem came to dream to each and every one of them and told them that they should leave go of Sarah right away. Warned them strictly they should leave go of Sarah. If we were to think back then the Paroi then and Avimelech then definitely had Avodah Zaras. They had Avodah Zaras in their bedrooms or in their apartments, and nonetheless HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to them. Why is it that over here the Rabbeinu Shalom is holding himself back from revealing himself to Moshe and relating to him the Parsha V'Chodesh Hazeh? The Rebbe explains it's very simple. Wherever there is a need and it is important, then the Rebbe does not take these things in consideration. Wherever it is, he reveals himself and relates whatever message needed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to rescue Sarah from the hands of Avimelech. So therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not go and take in consideration the fact that there is Avodah Zarah there and he shouldn't reveal himself to. If it's a question of HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to relate a message to Moshe Rabbeinu, and this message has to reach Pari immediately regarding Makas Peiris, which is being brought upon Mitzrayim, the Rebbe is not going to wait to take Moshe out of the residential area of Mitzrayim, out of the area where there is Avodah Zarah, and call Moshe out there and relate the message to him there. There's no need for that. Because this is something which the Rebbe has to relate to Moshe Rabbeinu right away. However, for example, this inyan of stopping the Makkah of Barad, which we learned about last week, where the Rebbe says that he will fulfill the wish of Moshe Rabbeinu, the wish of Paroi, and will stop the Makkah of Barad. The agreement between Moshe and Paroi was that this will happen l'macha, this will happen tomorrow. So if Moshe was supposed to stop the Makkah for tomorrow, why should he go in the midst of Mitzrayim, where there are Avodah Zaras, and talk to the Rabbeinu Shalom there? There's no rush. He could definitely take his time and go to the outskirts of the city where there is no Avodah Zarah and talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu there and be mispalel there that the Rebbe should stop the Makkah of Barad. Why? Because this is something which he had time till the next day. That was his arrangement with Paro. However, something which is negeya, which is relevant for right away, then the Rebbe Shataka relates the message right away. For example, this inyan of Achodesh Hazeh Lachem Reish Chadashim, this is something which there was no need to relate it in a rush when Moshe was standing in Mitzrayim or Moshe was in the house of Paroi. This is something which Moshe was able to afford his time and take it easy and go to the outskirts of the city and listen to the message of HaKadosh Baruch Hu there. Another inyan which the Rebbe discussed in today's Rashi, the second Rashi, is where the Pasuk tells us how the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, and the Pasuk uses the expression, it is a Leil Shimurim. This night is a night which is watched and guarded.
Yud Beis, Mem Beis.
Thank you. Yud Beis, Kapitel Yud Beis, Pasuk Mem Beis. And there Rashi quotes the words, Shimurem l'chol b'nei Yisrael l'deroisam. This is a night of watching, or guarding. HaKadosh Baruch Hu guards Yidden. L'deroisam, something which is from generation to generation. Actually, it's a stress for eternity. That eternal, the Rebbe guards us. What does Rashi say? Mishumar uba min hamazikin. This is a night which we are guarded from mazikin, from anything that can damage and can be harmful to Yidden. Ke'inyan shenema, like there's a pasuk, v'lo yitein hamashchis, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not allow anything to plague Yidden. So the same, this night is a night of shimurim, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not allow anything to plague Yidden. So the Rebbe is raising the question, why is there a need for Rashi also to quote the word lideroisam, that this is negay eternally, for generation to generation? Actually, Rashi is explaining the concept how HaKadosh Baruch Hu watched and guarded the Yidden. And this is what Rashi is stressing. Mishuma ruba min hamazikin. Why is there a need for Rashi to also quote the word l'derois? So we know the Rebbe always stresses that every word in Rashi is so accurate to the extent that not only there are words in Rashi's Pirush, in the commentary of Rashi, but even the words of the Pasuk, which are quoted by Rashi, it is by Rashi himself. Rashi himself was the one who chose which words of the Pasuk to quote, and therefore every word is extremely accurate. And if it is not relevant to the Pirush, to the commentary which Rashi gives us, then Rashi would not quote an extra word from the Pasuk. And here Rashi also quotes the word of l'deroisam. The Rebbe explains, we may want to say that this is an indication for the Geula HaSida, for the Geula to come. That the Geula which we will have through Mashiach Tzidkenu will be similar to the Geula which we had by Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the Pasuk tells us, Shimurim l'chayil b'nei Yisrael, this is an evening of guarding and watching for all Yidden, l'deiraisam, eternally, stressing, leading with an indication for the Geula to come. The Rebbe says we cannot learn that way, that this is the meaning of the Pasuk. Though we know Taka, the Chazal tell us, B'nisn nigalu, B'nisn asidin lihigoyel, we went out of Mitzrayim in the month of Nisan, and the Gemara says that we will be going out of this Golus also in the month of Nisan. However, at the same time, we know, based on what Chazal tell us, based on Psukim, that the Geula, which will be with the coming of Mashiach, will be much different than the Geula of Yetzias Mitzrayim. By Mitzrayim, we had to rush out of Mitzrayim. The Geula to come, Pasuk tells us, we will not have to rush, we will be going out in a very comfortable and easy way. In Mitzrayim, it was something where the Yidden were involved in the middle of the night. However, when it will come to the Geula to come, we will not have to do things in the middle of the night, we will be able to do everything in the middle of the bright afternoon. So we cannot say that this is an indication for the Pasuk here by saying the word L'Deiraisam indicates the Geula which will be coming through Mashiach Tzidkenu. Therefore the Rebbe learns that the L'Deiraisam means constantly throughout all the years in Golus, throughout all the years with us. Here was created a new concept. Shimurim l'choil b'nei Yisrael, that the Rebbe guards Yid. What does Rashi say? Mishuma ruba min hamazikim. Kin yeshanama v'lo yiten hamashchis lovei lingoy v'espateicha. We read earlier in this parsha, Rashi tells us that that night was a night when HaKadosh Baruch Hu damaged the Mitzrayim, plagued the Mitzrayim. So the Pasuk tells us, even though that was an evening of plague, the Rebbe still guarded us and protected us and did not allow that plague should reach to Yid. The same the Rebbe says, this is something which was instituted l'deiros. This is l'deiroisam, that though there is an inyan of mashchis, there is an inyan of plagues, however, the Rebbe instituted, as the Yidden left Mitzrayim, this special type of protection which he's giving Yidden throughout all the years. Mishuma ruba min hamazikim. And this is what Rashi is indicating, and that is why Rashi is quoting this pasuk, that this l'deiraisam does not only apply that the Rebbe guarded Yidden that evening when he took him out of Mitzrayim, but in general, as Rashi here tells us that night is a time of when damage can occur, night is a time of danger. So what are we told? That though it is a time of danger, the Rebbe will protect us. Now let us go to the Rambam. This Yud Shvat will be the siyum of the Rambam. In other words, those who have learned 3 Perakim a day throughout the last year will be finishing the Rambam on Yud Shvat. And in Torah we know that Torah is trimmed according to everybody's capabilities. Therefore the Rebbe says, there are those who are not capable of learning 3 Perakim a day, and their capabilities are to learn only 1 Perik a day. Which this is how Torah has set it up for those individuals. Those individuals as well will also be completing the Rambam. It is now 3 years since the Rebbe Zal Sein Gesund has instituted the inyan of learning Rambam on a daily basis. So, sai for those who are learning 3 Perakim a day, as well as for those who learn 1 Perik a day, this day of Yud Shvat will be the day of the Siyum HaRambam. So now we are up to in the last Perakim of the Rambam, and in today's Shir in Hilchis Malachim, the Rambam discusses the rules, the halachas of a Jewish war, how the Yidden are supposed to conduct a war, a battle. The Rambam tells us all the details, how we are to approach a milchama, whether it is a milchemes rishus or a milchemes mitzvah. And the Rambam gets involved in a detailed explanation
that there were the wars, the battles, which the Yidden were obligated to do. That is a Melchemes Mitzvah. When the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael, they were told that they have to take over Eretz Yisrael and destroy all of the 7 nations of the Knani, to such an extent of Lo Yisechaye Kol Neshama. We are not allowed to leave anyone alive. Then throughout the years, when there was Malachim by Yisrael, when there were kings by Yidden, there were Melchemes HaReshus, which means it wasn't something which was a war which the Yidden were obligated to go into, but it was up to the decision of the Melech whether to go into this war or not to go into this war. But regardless, getting back to the Melchemes Mitzvah of conquering Eretz Yisrael, here the Torah tells us Leisechaye Kol Neshama, that we are not allowed to leave alive anyone who is a member in the Zion Umis, in the 7 nations who resided in Eretz Yisrael before the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael. We also have a similar commandment regarding Amalek. Amalek, we are told that any descendant of Amalek, or anything which belonged to anyone of Amalek, we are to destroy. Mochei timche es zecher Amalek. The remembrance of Amalek is supposed to be totally destroyed. Now the Rambam tells us, it's explained based on Amalek was the Rishis, especially on Chassidus stresses, Rishis Goyim Amalek. Amalek was the one who, as soon as the Yidden left Mitzrayim, at that time anyone and everyone was afraid to start up with the Yidden. Nation who just went through such miracles from the Rabbeinu Shalom, the Rabbeinu Shalom extended them such warmth. So everybody was afraid to get close to them. Amalek did not mind. On the contrary, Amalek was the first one that said he will go forward and he will show. It's explained in Chassidus and a Chazal, a mashal of a hot bath, a steaming bath, that everybody was afraid to go into it. There was one individual that said he doesn't mind. He will jump into it. Once he jumps into it, then it's easier for people to follow. The same was Amalek's attitude. He was the first one that went ahead, had the chutzpah to go ahead and start up with Yidden. Pasuk uses the expression Asher kolcha b'derech. We will get back to this pasuk soon. So regarding Amalek, Torah also tells us the same. Mochei timche es zecher zecher Amalek. Now the Rambam tells us our attitude has to be in a war as follows. When we come into any country, first we have to be peseach b'sholem, which means we have to give the people an opportunity for peace. We just don't go into a country and start killing. If they agree to peace, the Rambam explains exactly what they have to agree to. If they agree to peace, the Rambam says, and we let them live. If they don't agree to peace, that is when we go and we fulfill this commandment of Leisechaye Kol Neshama. Based on this, the Rebbe says we can understand the Gemara. Gemara tells us that B'nei Bonov Shal Haman Lomdu Torah B'nei Barak. That Einiklach of Haman, descendants of Haman, learned Torah in B'nei Barak. Haman, we know, was a descendant of Amalek. So if Haman was a descendant of Amalek, and we just discussed that regarding Amalek we are told Mochei Timche, that we are to erase Amalek, so how can we have descendants of Amalek learning Torah in Bnei Barak? So the only way we can explain this, the Rebbe says, is that these were individuals who were descendants of Amalek, that when we approached them for shalom, when we approached for peace, they gave in for peace. And if they gave in for peace, that is, so we don't do anything to them. Now the Rebbe is asking, based on what we know, these details regarding the 7 nations as well as Amalek are not applicable nowadays. Why? Mother tells us, Bo Sancherev came, ubilbel es kol ha'olam, and he integrated the entire world. So now we really don't know who is an Amaleki and who is from the Zionumis. So now we cannot go ahead and kill any one of these goyim because we don't know who they are. We really cannot trace back their identity, who they are. So if so, the Rebbe says, we are lacking the fulfillment of this mitzvah. This is a mitzvah of Leisachaya Kol Neshama. There's a mitzvah of Mechiyas HaMolek. Now that we cannot fulfill this mitzvah, we are lacking this mitzvah. We cannot learn that it is a temporary mitzvah, because the Rambam, when the Rambam lists all the mitzvahs, the Rambam does list these mitzvahs. We know that there are many mitzvahs which were temporary mitzvahs. For example, in today's Sedra we read how the Yidden were makriv the Korban Pesach, the initial Korban Pesach which they brought in Mitzrayim. So we know that by the initial Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim, there were special instructions which were not to be repeated in the later years when the Yidden brought the Korban Pesach. These special instructions regarding the Korban Pesach, the Pesach Mitzrayim, are not part of the Taryag mitzvahs. Why? Because this was only a Hira Shah, this was something temporary for that year. The inyan of Leisachaya Kol Neshama regarding the 7 Umas, or the inyan of not to leave any one of Amalek, this is one, and Amalek another one, of the 613 mitzvahs. And it is to such an extent that we know that the person has Ramache Vorem, there are 248 parts in a person's body, and this corresponds to the 248 mitzvahs asay. So, what happens with these 2 mitzvahs that we cannot fulfill now? Where do they stand, and they are still considered as part of the Taryag mitzvahs? So here the Rebbe explains, there are the mitzvahs begashmiyas, and we have the mitzvahs in the spiritual sense. And actually, this spiritual interpretation, this is the reason for the mitzvah. Why Taka did the Torah tell us that we are not allowed to leave any one of the Zion Ummahs alive? The Torah tells us, Leisachaya Kol Neshama, because the Rebbeinu Shalom knew that those individuals, those nations at that time were extremely rotten in a spiritual way. They were very, very low spiritually, and that is why the Rebishter did not want that Yidden should associate with them and mingle with them, and thereby we will learn Mimaaseyim, we will learn from their acts and deeds. So for this reason the Rebishter said, Leisachaya Kol Neshama. Spiritually for us now as well, and as the Rebbe said, based on the Rambam tells us how important the deis of a Yid are, the hashkafas, our views. Not only are our acts and deeds important, but our views, our thinking, our approach to inyanim, the way we view the inyanim spiritually is also of extreme importance. And as the Rebbe keeps on mentioning the Rambam and Hilchas Tmura, that the whole inyan of mitzvahs is liyasher hadeyo, is to straighten out our minds and spiritually lift up our thinking, our view on inyanim. What is the inyan of the Zion Umas? When a Yid comes into contact with something which is a strong obstacle, interfering him from serving the Rebbeinu Shalom, this is the same idea as the Zion Umas. And the Yid is told that he has to kill it and destroy it. And this is hard for a Yid. Why is it hard for a Yid? Because the Gemara tells us that Yidden by nature are Rachmanim. Yidden are full of pity and Rachmanis. And therefore, for a person that possesses the nature of Rachmanis, of pity, it is hard to require from him that he should go ahead and kill and destroy. It's contrary to his nature. At the same time, here we are told that in the spiritual sense, this is how do we fulfill the mitzvah of Leisachaya Kol Neshama now? By destroying those spiritual interferences which do not let us fulfill the wish of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and stands in the way and stands there as a block and does not allow us to do what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants us to do. This is the idea of Zion Ummahs, of the 7 nations, and by us destroying these obstacles, we are fulfilling the mitzvah of Leisachaya Kol Neshama. The Rebbe spoke very particularly demanding from each and every one of us to prepare ourselves properly for the day of Yud Shvat, for this outstanding day, and utilize the time that is left We only have a very short time that is left until Yud Shvat, and to see to it that every moment is utilized. And the Rebbe said not that we should sit down and think, what should we do? And at the same time we will think what somebody else said. And we will get involved in thinking and thinking and thinking. And by the time we'll finish thinking, the clock will move, the sun will move, and the moon will move, and here we will be out into Yud Shvat already. This is not what we are to do. We are to utilize all the time that is left until Yud Shvat, and see to it that all this time is utilized properly, especially that there's the letter from the Rebbe, which was written by the Rebbe Zilgazin many years ago, with detailed instructions how to utilize the day of Yud Shvat and the days around Yud Shvat. The Rebbe also related a very interesting story that happened with Rab Nachum Chernobyl. Rab Nachum Chernobyl was once seeing Hasidim. Hasidim were coming to him on Yechidus. And a particular Chassid came to him and gave him a large sum of money. Rab Nachum Chernobyl was extremely poor. He received this large sum of money, and right afterwards, the next Chassid that came in was a Chassid that came to tell the Rab Nachum Chernobyl that he has a daughter to marry, and does not have a cent, for the hitzoyes, for the expenses that are involved. And when getting into a conversation with this chassid, Rab Nachum Chernobyl hears that this amount which he just received from the Yid that was here before him would be the typical amount, the exact amount which would be useful and handy for this individual to be able to marry off his daughter. So Rab Nachum Chernobyl began thinking, what should he do? Should he take this large sum of money and give it to this individual? Or perhaps it is better not to do that, and being that this is a large sum of money, he will break up this sum of money, and with this sum of money he can help many, many individuals. Why give it all to one person? And he debated in his mind, what should he do? And then it suddenly came to his mind the following thought. If he would have had these ideas before this individual came, before this happened, then he would have been right. Perhaps not to give it all to this one person, perhaps break it up and give it to many Armalite, give it to many poor people. Before that he did not have these thoughts. When did all these thoughts begin happening? Once he received this large sum of money, and thereafter immediately somebody who's in need of this large sum of money came to ask for it. So Rab Nachum started saying to himself that these calculations, that perhaps better spread it to many Aramalite, these calculations, this is not from the Yetzirah. The Yetzirah is not giving him this advice. This must be the Kluginker, the smarty, in other words, I'm sorry. This is not the Yetzer Tov who's giving him this advice. This is the smarty, the Yetzer Hara, who's giving him such type of advices. And therefore, what Rab Nachum immediately did was, he took the entire sum of money and gave it to this individual who requested it, who came to the Rebbe and requested it, that he does not have a son to marry his child, and this sum would just be identical for him to be able to marry his child. The Rebbe also, talking about this inyan, the Rebbe stressed how when it comes to tzedakah in general, we have to react right away. When a Yid is in need of tzedakah, it's not a time to sit back and we are going to go to the mikveh first. Before we do a mitzvah, we go to the mikveh. Actually, the Rebbe didn't mention it today, but previously the Rebbe referred to it. But this is also an interpretation why we don't make a bracha on tzedakah. Tzedakah is such an outstanding mitzvah, why don't we make a bracha on it? So this is how the Rebbe once explained it. Before a Yid makes a bracha, he will want to go to the mikveh and would want to do other preparations. A kleinigkeit, he's going to do such an outstanding mitzvah. And while he's doing all his preparations, there's the Araman, the poor person who's in need of the couple of cents, is in need of the assistance. In the meantime, who knows what could happen to the poor person while this Yid is preparing himself to fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah. And as the Rebbe expressed himself today, first one will do preparations, and then after doing the preparations, he will go ahead and have his juice. And after he will do all of this, then he will go and help the Raman. This is not the way we have to do it. When we know that somebody is in need of assistance, we have to be there immediately and stretch our hands out and give him the help that we need. A gute Woche.